thanks for the warning.
Yeah, now they're hot. So everything you said before, now they're hot.
Can't believe you were saying those things about EMAC too.
Well, yeah, he probably deserves
anyone, but I mean anyone but EMAC in 2024. There's a lot of people that fall under that. Anyone, man. You know.
Well, yeah, I mean
against EMAC, like he's got a good platform.
I tell you, if you put it out there, the leading Democrat, the leading Republican, or EMAC, that's how you get EMAC on board. All right. As far as anybody else out there, I don't care if you've been voting one side all your life, you have a better option with EMAC.
That's it. And everybody, like, it's the candidate that will unite everybody. Like,
absolutely.
It's not going to split a ticket. It's going to bring everyone together. Like the Fringe will have their 10% over here, their 10% over there.
There we go.
And bam, 80% EMAC. 80% EMAC.
Oh, welcome in. It is a Sunday. It's the end of the weekend, technically, but it's a work day for you out there. That's why you're here. We're going to win some money. And Terry McBride is in the house. That's why he's here, among other things. Like, we have a bunch of stuff that we'll just throw out because it's myself and Terry. You never know where that's going to go. Mike Osimio in the house producing on this Sunday as well. So the three of us are here. You in the chat. We love it. We love to see you. We love to see your comments already building up here. And yeah, EMAC already getting some love as the independent candidate. You know the drill out here. Look, hit the thumbs up button. Make sure you're subscribed. The community here, ever growing, of course, on Stokastic. We'll run through this slate for you today and hopefully have some fun. I know Terry and I and Mike are going to have some fun. So if you don't have some fun out there, that's on you. I mean, right? Normally we're like, hey, we're going to have some fun. No, we hope you're no. At this point, we know what we're doing when it comes to having fun. If they aren't having fun, Terry, it's on them.
That's it. If they're not having fun, they're the few people out there who sit there all curmudgeonly and just listen and complain about, instead of listening to the good advice that we're throwing out there, complain about how we pronounce players' names and don't hit the like button and shit like that. And, those are the people that don't have a good time on this show. But did you just conjured in that intro? You kind of conjured the old Steve Summers intro for me.
Yes.
As you were doing that. I think you had a little me here and you there in there somewhere.
I appreciate you picking that up. Absolutely. Right. I mean, look, I might be in Philadelphia. I might be a Philadelphian for the last, 30 years now or so of my life here, but I still have my heart, which was put on this planet in New York City. And I, like you and countless others, grew up listening to Chris and Mike, and Steve Summers was a huge part of it. So it's not just the homage to Steve. It's the fact that you as well can pick something up like that. Like, I can't do that with Eric Lindquist. He can't appreciate something like that.
No, what does he know from New York radio? He grew up listening to those like cow auction radio things.
Yeah, what the hell?
Right. Show prank calls. Right. When you're the target of the prank calls, you're probably not getting the references.
Oh my God, that is hilarious. I'm going to steal that. When you're the target. When you're the target of the prank calls. No, but you're not getting it. I might even drop a little Russo. I got the NRFI video today that's up on the Odd Shopper channel. Nice little plug for the channel there. Nice. I couldn't help myself. I went into like maybe 20 seconds. Not even. That's way too long. Probably like 3 seconds of Russo. Just a little
mad
bit.
Dog mode.
I couldn't help it. I couldn't help it, man. So
love it.
How's life? Everything good here before we jump in this slate?
Yeah, everything's good. Didn't have nearly the night last night that I did on Friday night when I took the tournament down. Last night, Congrats. I had a fantastic show yesterday in terms of like everything I said on the show. I think I had a really good show. I hope some people out there were able to capitalize on it because nothing that I said ended up coming together like in that perfect combination in my lineups where it was just like, for some reason I had a bunch of Dodgers. I didn't have Will Smith. I had a bunch of, I just didn't have the right combinations of guys in it. It was one of those ones that just pissed me off, but I felt like I had a great show. So like I said, I hope somebody out there capitalized on it. And we're going to try and nail it today across the board for both me and everybody out there.
Well, definitely capitalizing on Friday night, right?
Yeah, Friday night went well.
Yeah. It always helps with a night like that, man.
Absolutely.
Congrats.
Yeah, sure. Pays for a lot of nights like last night.
Hey, and that's the whole thing. Exactly, because you're going to get a ton of congrats. Absolutely.
Yep.
And rightfully so. Yeah, Brandon asking what you ship. So here we go, brother.
30 on Friday.
30?
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Congrats, man.
Thanks,
Congrats.
everybody.
Well
Thanks,
deserved.
everyone.
You grind through this and wins like that, I'm sure feel great and well deserved.
They do. Yeah, absolutely. And it's been a very, very good season for me. So I've had a couple like that. It had been a cold August so far, so it was nice to turn things around. I had done an update in my model like right before August started, and it immediately just started like, whoa, what's going on here? Did I fuck something up? What's going on? So that was helpful in believing back in, all right, I didn't screw anything up. It was just some weird happenstance in there. So
has that happened before whenever you tweak a model where it may take it, like getting a new right? A new driver, it's going to take a little bit.
It does. And for some inexplicable reasons, sometimes like the first week or two it'll come up cold for whatever reason. And it's not like the numbers should have to like click into place or anything. Cause it's just, it's an update on the numbers that it was already using and the formulas are all the same. So it's just weird, but it's funny that you asked that. It has actually happened in the past. So that's why I kind of hold out. I don't try and make some like crazy changes. And, again, helps justify the process and helps justify that everything's in the right place.
Yes, that's a nice justification. By all means, knocking that in. So whether it's the feel on Saturday or the actual victory on Friday, we have pretty good momentum, I would think, heading into this Sunday, right? So overall, what are you looking at? Anything that may jump out at you? We'll talk individually. We'll bounce around and go game by game and start, of course, in Toronto to open things. But as far as just the slate or maybe just a feel, right? Maybe we should just be tapping into your brain the way that Friday went and even Saturday felt.
So I think it's another slate where we've got some pretty good pitching. It's not nearly as maybe it lacks the high point, I should say, that the last couple slates have had, where we've had the DeGroms of the world on the last couple slates. Today we're talking about like Christian Javier looks excellent against the Athletics. Zach Wheeler is going for the Phillies against the Mets. It's a tough spot, but obviously grades out well, but he's pitching against Chris Bassitt, who kind of is in the same spot. So that'll be an interesting one to see how that breaks down. And then there's a lot of guys in the, Kevin Gausman's on the slate, but tough matchup against the Guardians. But there's a lot of guys in like the Logan Gilbert, the Keegan Thompson is kind of interesting. Lance Lynn is very interesting against the Tigers, but getting a ton of popularity. Right. So it's a slate where it's not as stark as it's been some of the last few days, but I do think there's some depth of options where it's another one where we can spread it around. And then the other big thing to call out is that on the FanDuel slate, we've got the Coors game to deal with where it doesn't exist on the DraftKings slate.
Right. That's a big difference for sure. So we will get to that Coors game absolutely out there. All right. So let's dive into it. And again, if you haven't hit that thumbs up button, all the comments in the chat, we love, keep them coming across the board. Something will open up, some random side topic about TV or film. It's going to happen. All right. It doesn't have to be like, hey, and I also have this side topic. Terry's going to say something. I'm going to say something. Mike's going to say something in the chat. You are going to say something ridiculous in the chat out there as well. And it's going to open it up by all means. But let's look at the
biggest misperception out there is that we prepare these things for these shows ahead of time.
Exactly. And all transparency, I was here in front of the camera 12 minutes ago. Now that's terrible. I should never be that late, but you're right. There wasn't a sit down a half hour ahead. Okay. Yeah. You're going to say this is an ESPN first take. All right. We don't map out what Terry's going to say word by word.
Well, I mean, on this side, I've got the whole prompter set up over here. The makeup girl's over there in the corner having her coffee now. She did, all this glorious work.
Is that right? The prompter? Okay. Now, do you have the pedal for the prompter too?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I could speed it up. I could slow it down. I can bring it back.
All right, let's look at Shane Bieber. And you mentioned Kevin Gausman on the slate here, Toronto and Cleveland. Jay's hosting this one, and some workable K rates for sure, especially with Gausman. So if it's just looking at the field or really just this game as a whole, I mean, there's going to be some decent opportunity to work with leverage with Shane Bieber. Gausman, you're getting actually positive leverage, which I don't know if the Cleveland matchup itself is an issue. 8,200 on DK doesn't seem like a ton. Now, granted, this slate doesn't have a 10K plus guy, but am I missing something where Gausman against Cleveland is still getting positive leverage?
It's just a tough spot. They don't strike out a lot. 15.6% strikeout rate for the active roster is easily the best mark in baseball against right-handed pitching. So it just potentially limits the upside. And some of that is held down by like a Stephen Kwan, who's not a threat otherwise in really any sense of the word. I mean, he does help create runs because he puts the ball in play a lot, but he doesn't have any power really to speak of. 3 home runs on the year at 0.096 ISO, but a 8.7% strikeout rate. That's going to help bring the average down. Jose Ramirez, obviously a superstar, only a 9.2% strikeout rate, which is just bonkers. He's so good. But there are other guys like Ahmed Rosario hitting next to him, Josh Naylor in the teens, Miles Straw down the bottom of the lineup, another slap hitting kind of a guy, but also in the mid-teens. So it's a very good team for avoiding strikeout rate. And then, those guys just do bring that average down to, just eye-popping levels. But I do think they limit the upside for Gausman just enough. 28.1% strikeout rate. There's nothing not to like about that. 2.79 xFIP, a 2.91 ERA on the season. Doesn't allow very much power at all, a 1.23% home run rate. So I'm not exactly expecting the Guardians, almost said it. I'm not exactly expecting the Guardians to go off here, but I'm not necessarily projecting a monster game for Kevin Gausman. He projects out pretty well. He's in the top third of my pitchers here, but I think there's just other guys that I'd rather get to that I trusted a little bit more given the strikeout matchup.
Well, again, you're dealing with a little bit less of a K rate there for Bieber on the other side. So I don't know if there's enough of an opening with Toronto's lineup to maybe take advantage of that versus where we kind of see, which is, he's kind of in that same range, if you will, as Gausman. If you look at ownership and whatnot, the difference, of course, is going to be really cost. And it's not much. It's just 600 more for Bieber. But again, it's more so if you think that they can take advantage, which Gausman, you said, is not based on the low strikeout rate with Cleveland.
Yeah, and look, like I said, I mean, Gausman is a very good play. He's projecting into the top third, so I'm not saying don't play him. I'm just saying, consider what you're buying into there and what your other options are. There are just other better strikeout spots. So if we're looking for that ceiling game, then I might be shopping around a little bit. But there is definitely nothing wrong with at 8,200 going to Gausman, and the same thing is true about Shane Bieber on the other side, 8,800. He's even lower owned. I think I like that side of this equation a little bit better, despite the fact Bieber's got a 25.4% strikeout rate compared to the 28 on the other side for Gausman. It's Shane Bieber. He was 33.1% last year, not over 96 and 2/3 before he got hurt. So I trust Shane Bieber to find some upside. The Blue Jays lineup is very, very good. Not one that I particularly like to tangle with. They're 8th best against right-handed pitching, 20.5% strikeout rate, but that's a big difference, 5 percentage point difference in terms of the strikeout rate on either side of this one. So I see some upside in going to, if they're both positively leveraged, then I think you can go to them. And the big story here too, between site to site, is there's a basically $2,000 price difference on both of these guys from site to site. On FanDuel, they're both owned under 5%. Take your shots as many times as you want to there. It's easy to get over the field there. Where they're more of a value play in that like mid-range value play, mid-range projection for good pitchers in bad matchups, I think it's interesting to go like maybe around the field on Gausman and then maybe get a little over on Bieber, who's only 12%.
So looking at the stacks here as we flip it before we move on real quick, Terry, just looking at it from the standpoint of gaining any leverage against the field, Cleveland is not necessarily on DK, at least not necessarily, nor are Toronto, to be honest, because they're in similar spots, just marginally over or under the zero leverage score. So if you're going to one or both of these stacks and you get over on Gausman, you get over on Bieber, it's not an added advantage, which may add to that risk because you're not knocking out more than, maybe 18% of the field if you're lucky. And that's with Gausman, and that could drop, to be honest.
Yeah, it's not one of those spots where you're swiping at, 40% of the field who's got a specific pitcher. And to be honest, these aren't guys that are typically going to get lit up. Neither one of these guys allows a ton of power. 2.08% home run rate for Bieber over his 131 and 2/3 this year, a 1.23 for Gausman over 117 and 2/3. These are both very good pitchers. There's a chance this game plays, 2-1, 3-2, something like that. Both sides are just kept down, but both pitchers don't necessarily find that huge ceiling game. They just put up, mid-30s FanDuel game. That's probably not going to be slate winning today. We're probably going to need one of those high 40s into the 50s, into the 60s kind of games again, because there's a bunch of good spots. And this isn't necessarily one of them. I'd rather just take some of those shares against some of the worst teams in baseball that we're getting with some of the good pitchers on the board. So I will have some of both of these guys, but it'll be tempered in terms of, where I'm at.
All right. Now, speaking of being able to take advantage of, and you talked about Keegan Thompson at the top. What about the other guy in the Cubs Reds game as we move on here, Justin Dunn? And I know fresh right, to the bigs this year, but still, this has got to be, even with the projected total north of 5 for Chicago, this has got to be, and I imagine you're fading Dunn to some extent, if not all extent here, but this has got to be a really good spot for Chicago, despite having a significantly, and honestly, it makes sense, right, that they would be, the time us doing the show, the most negatively leveraged stack going up against Justin Dunn.
Yeah, they're popping at the top of not the top, but top 3 in my power index today. When they jumped up there, I was saying, maybe there's a chance they come through and no, they're not going to be sneaky whatsoever. They're very popular on both sites, but there's spots in there that, I think they're worth going to overall as a stack anyway. They're showing a lot of power. There's reason to believe in that upside against Dunn, a 9.1% strikeout rate. It's only 4 2/3 innings, though. We can't really count that, but Dunn got tattooed in those 4 2/3 innings in one start. Last season, 22.5% strikeout rate, but a 13.3% walk rate and a 5.61%, a 5.61 xFIP over 11 starts and 50 and a third innings. So he's targetable. The ballpark's targetable. The hitting conditions are going to be targetable. I like throwing Cubbies bats at him. The only issue is going to be the ownership, but you can get away from some popularity at pitching pretty easily. You can get away from popularity with your secondary stacks or your one-offs, whatever you're doing after you roster some of these Cubs. And there's low-owned, interesting bats like a Nico Horner hitting 5th. He's nobody's idea of a great player to go to, but 299, 342, 419, creating runs 11% better than average, 7 home runs, 12 stolen bases. That's a frisky enough fantasy player for 10% ownership at shortstop, no less. A valuable position, 2,700 on FanDuel, 12% owned. I have no issues going to him. He's lowish, so he's immediately offsetting stuff. Patrick Wisdom, only 14%, 17% across the 2 sites. I say only because that's lower relative to the top.
Yep.
And then you get down to like the Yan Gomes of the world. The Chris Morel hitting 9th is kind of interesting, but he costs 5,100 on DK. It's keeping his ownership down multi-position. I don't know that he's that interesting, but he's an offset for some of the popularity. He's the second most expensive hitter, hitting 9th. Kind of weird. On FanDuel, he's 3,000 and not drawing that much ownership. So maybe a better play on FanDuel where he's also cheap, but I think he's an interesting bat in there who's not getting a ton of ownership. So there are ways to put that stack together and just take some shots at Justin Dunn, regardless of the popularity.
So now with Thompson, it kind of goes twofold here, right? You've got him at 6,300 on DK. You talked about him being a cheaper option, somebody that might pop up here against Cincinnati, but also looking at the positive leverage that you can get by going to the Reds, right? Even in some sort of scenario there where you can cover. I mean, they don't have a terrible score overall. There is some positive leverage. So you're also getting very little ownership, it looks like, right, for Thompson. So again, this is not countering or decimating a large part of the field. It's kind of just what maybe you're looking at from a stronger standpoint, from a gut for you, right? Is it taking the risk on Thompson, or maybe that lesser risk, but more leverage as well from a stack standpoint with Cincinnati?
Yeah, it's honestly just one of those spots where you can take a shot at a bad team. It comes with a giant asterisk that this is a mediocre pitcher in a very bad ballpark for pitching. Yep. So you've got to take that under consideration, but you're targeting a team with a 23.2% strikeout rate against righties. That's 23rd in baseball, and one that creates runs 22% worse than average against righties. That's 29th out of 30 teams in baseball, not to mention a 28th ranked home run rate, 29th ranked ISO. So there's just not much there in that Cincinnati lineup, especially now that Brandon Drury's not in the lineup. I think Keegan Thompson has enough talent, has enough upside, particularly at that $6,300 price on DK, where he's 1% owned, as a very cheap option that you can pair with basically anything and throw in at 1% ownership. That's an interesting enough tournament play. 20.8% strikeout rate over 99 innings. He's got a 7.5% walk rate, a 1.24 whip. Those are both a little higher than you'd like, but a 4.31 xFIP to go with his 3.36 ERA. Both of those are respectable enough. He hasn't been tragically bad for power, only a 2.66% home run rate. So reason to have some faith in Keegan Thompson. He was a higher strikeout rate last year, along with a higher walk rate, higher everything else. But there are some strikeout upside here. There's some potential here. So as a tournament play, I think he's interesting. Prefer him on DK where he's 63. At 81 on FanDuel, we're pushing the limits of my my credulity here.
Yep.
But I might have a few shares. He'd be like one of my bottom ranked, very low end shots as a lotto ticket.
That's great. And look, I mean, where Alex has it on site, even the Cubs and Reds, from a stack standpoint, are two of the top 6 projected from just simply a top stack.
And it's great hitting conditions.
Exactly.
And this is one of the higher run totals on the board. The Cubbies have a 5.3 total. The Reds at a 4.3. So you just prefer the Cubbies side of it because they're getting the weight from that. They're showing some power. And I think they're going up against the worst, at least currently, pitcher in this game. So there's reason to believe there, but those are also very good reasons to, if you're rostering Keegan Thompson, be sure that you grab a few hedge stacks of Reds here. And it's not like they're going to be low owned either. They're drawing some popularity. It's just a bad lineup. Remember everything that I said about it a minute ago. So know what you're doing in that regard. I wouldn't go anywhere near the public's level of ownership on the Reds. I think they're over owned.
All right, Bryce Elder is on the mound for Atlanta, Miami, hosting the Braves here, Terry. So Braxton Garrett, and this has kind of been the theme here, right? For a lot of guys outside of Sandy Alcantara, because he's just on another planet. But whoever the situation is, you know that you have a high K rate that can factor in more often than not. And Braxton Garrett, good number at least, right, to start this conversation with. I just don't know. We talked about this in the first game, really, with Gausman, if there's an opportunity. It's one thing to have a K rate that you can work with. It's another thing if the other team is going to allow you to take advantage of that more often than not. So, and the reason why I bring that up on top of that too, is that we don't have a 5.2 or a 5.3 run projection for Atlanta. It's a little bit lower in that mid-4 range. So let's start with the pitchers here, and mainly Garrett, I think, from that standpoint, as far as, if you wanted to look at either of these guys, Elder at 7,500 and Garrett on the other side on DK 7,600. So you're in similar spots from a cost and really leverage standpoint. It's not that wide either.
Yeah, Elder, I'm going to pass on, despite he's coming in at 5,500 on FanDuel, 7,500 on DK.
Yeah, that's a lot.
I think it's just a pass. This is just his second start back. I think he only threw 50 some odd pitches in his first start. So I think he just needs to get stretched out a little bit. Maybe it becomes interesting down the stretch. On the Marlins side, yeah, that's the tricky part with going up against this Braves team. They are vulnerable for strikeouts. They've yielded some big starts to some pitchers over the course of the season. A 23.5% strikeout rate against left-handed pitching is interesting to me against a pitcher, Braxton Garrett, a lefty, with a 26% strikeout rate over his 62 2/3 this year. The only problem with that is that you're also running him into a Braves team with a 131 WRC plus against lefties this season, a 3.08% home run rate, a 187 ISO. Those rank the WRC plus is 3rd, the ISO is 6th. The home run rate is only 11th, but those are all very good marks against lefties. So it's a Braves team where there's a lot of upside for them in the stack. There's some upside for the pitcher. There's a lot of danger for the pitcher. He's low owned enough and low priced enough, particularly on DK, where we need that second pitcher, that I do think he's an interesting tournament option. 6.1% for 7,600. The upside is there for this kid. 3.20 xFIP also for the season, a 2.64% home run rate. I'm talking about him as though like the strikeouts are the only thing. And he's been good at limiting premium contact. He's been a good pitcher this season. He's also generating a 12.7% swinging strike rate. So there's enough believability in it that despite the risk, despite the threat from the Braves on the other side, I think he's worth playing in tournaments. 8,204% ownership on FanDuel. That's definitely an interesting tournament spot. If he gets through 6th, it could quality be a good start, right? Yeah, he's got to hit me that quality start, I think, to have that tournament winning upside. But if he gets to that level, that means he's probably gotten me the strikeouts that I want. Right. So it's kind of, they both go hand in hand. So, I'm kind of good with rolling those dice, at least for a few shares. It's easy enough to get beyond 4% ownership. That said, I will definitely roster some Braves on the other side. They're showing through for some power, and they're pretty damn cheap for this roster.
Shout out to Rick with 2KSG for being our newest subscriber here to the channel. But that's the thing, though, Terry, and that's where I was thinking in my head through as you were looking at it here. From how good the Braves hit, that seemed to me like the counter to where the quality, like that would negate. And again, I'm just bouncing it back, so you can tell me if it's worth the risk here. But that would negate, I think, the risk on FanDuel unless I could get a significant and not it isn't, but noticeable maybe price break here. DK, though, to your point about being a tournament option in DK where you don't have to worry about that quality start, maybe that does help versus this Braves lineup. But what you laid out with the Braves lineup, how well they hit lefties going up against Garrett, that made me think, all right, this isn't a fade Garrett scenario, but it may be more in a FanDuel scenario. So it sounded like you were a little more optimistic about him on FanDuel than maybe I took.
I do think that the strikeout upside is there. So in this price range, like I think there's probably more upside and at least more reliability, and it projects out better for Drew Rasmussen for 7,800 against the Orioles. Even Miles Mikolas, who I don't really believe in that much at 8,700, is projecting out a little bit better against Milwaukee. Keegan Thompson is projecting out slightly better. There are guys that project better, but that's largely because of the impact of the Braves offensive upside carving out part of Braxton Garrett's upside in my model. So if we take that component away, I think he's technically got more strikeout upside than most of those options. So it's just an interesting scenario tangling with this team when you get a pitcher like this who shows some, talent across the board, decent strikeout upside, comes through at no ownership. If the field doesn't want it, I'll take it. If he was more popular than this, I wouldn't be saying it. If he was double that ownership, if he was like 12% even on DK, let alone higher than that, I'd probably be saying, yeah, it looks okay. It could come through, but maybe not. At this ownership, I think we take some shots at it. It's a tournament play. You know what you got to know what you're doing with it. If I was only building 3 lineups and a 3 max, I might not do it. It's more of a large field multi-entry tournament play.
All right. Now I can't imagine you're going to get much to Miami from a stack standpoint. Atlanta, though, may open up a longer conversation.
Yeah, Atlanta's definitely more worthwhile.
Miami, we can almost bypass. I mean, unless you're picking a guy or two off.
Yeah, I mean, nobody was really popping through for me. You could always grab some shares of Jesus Aguilar if you want a one-off in there. A guy like John Birdie and his steals, if he gets on base, 366 on base percentage, 28 steals on the season for him in 227 plate appearances. That's impressive. Sure, he can produce. Not the most reliable guy in the world. This isn't a great team. There's not that much reason to go here. You do get the start against Elder, who probably won't be in there for very long, then into the bullpen, but it's a decent bullpen in Atlanta. So I wouldn't necessarily go there. Other side is much more interesting, especially if you're rostering some Garrett.
We got to stop for a second here because it wasn't just Terry who had himself a night. Look at this super chat from Jorge. First off, $400. I mean, my goodness. I thought it was just Terry's pretty face at first. And then I look over and I'm thinking, oh, whoa. Sharing the overdue appreciation for last weekend. Won the DK 100K, $1 mini max and 4-seamer. Thanks again with the exclamation point. Understanding that it's never one to raise a village in these tournaments. We'll drop the question. Thoughts? First off, before we even get to his question,
that is a monster trifecta.
Holy shit! Absolutely. Are you kidding me?
That is a monster performance, Jorge. Congratulations, buddy. That's awesome, and we appreciate that monster super chat. I think like 5 or 6 messages in our Slack just popped up about that. So we appreciate the generosity, man. Not totally necessary on your part.
Oh,
we'll absolutely take it, and thank you very much. And congratulations. That's awesome to see. And that keeps us warm on the cold nights when our lineups aren't going well, seeing people like you win. So congratulations.
That is amazing. Amazing. Thanks again with the exclamation point. So this isn't Jorge coming in to just brag and dust a little off. This is a recognition that it's not just analysis and things that can be put out on these shows. It's what's available on the site. And it's understanding how to use a lot of that. And that comes with the process and going through your own or others. And Jorge has done that. And that is just fantastic to see. So, I could just jump in. I'll wait until we're done here because Jorge deserves the multiple pats on the back. But we have to remind people that there's an easy way to get in now, cheap as well, and take advantage of the same stuff that Jorge does. But
the plug, I think everybody was expecting the plug. We don't want to disappoint the people. Do your awesome read.
When you say the people, do you mean management or do you mean the chat?
Can't it be both?
Technically, right. I'll tell you what, I'll plug everything as soon as we're done with Jorge's question. The least we can do is answer this man's question, Terry McBride. All right.
I feel like that's fair.
Here it is. Javier versus the Astros. Been terrible versus Houston and LA or terrible versus Houston. And then the Dodgers versus Singer. And we always have a chance for you, my friend. Thanks again for you. But Jorge is saying thanks again for all the info and tips.
I assume
so it's a 2-part. Javier versus Houston, Dodgers versus Singer. Sorry.
I assume that he flipped that by accident in his head because Javier pitches for Houston.
Right.
He's pitching against the Athletics. Sorry.
Yes.
If he's been bad against them in his recent starts, which isn't something that I look at or care about, that's just happenstance. He's a very good pitcher, and they are a terrible baseball team. They've been super targetable all year long. They have a ton of strikeout in their lineup, although some of it is kept down today. Tony Kemp, Vima Machine. I'm not sure how to say his name. Some of these guys, Elvis Andrews is 15.6% strikeout rate, but you'll also recognize those guys as not necessarily offensive threats. I think Christian Javier's got a great chance to have a big start here. Only 8,700 on the DK slate for 41% ownership. You could argue that he's very, very popular, but I think he's worth that weight of ownership, especially at that price. 21% on FanDuel, 10.6. I still think he's worth it, even for the inflated price, even at the inflated ownership. Projects out at the top of my board for pitchers.
All right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Oh, man. And the Dodgers versus Singer. I think Singer's a good young pitcher. They're the Dodgers. I never have a problem taking them against even much, much better pitchers than Singer. So fire away if your question was about the Dodgers side of that. I think there's some potentially sneaky upside for Singer. I just wish he was cheaper on that DK slate. But you're taking shots against the Dodgers. There's probably better spots if you're asking about the Singer side of that.
Yeah, overall, with the K rate, the walk rate, you look at what he's doing from a metric standpoint, he's not as bad as the record, which is a terrible indication of anything outside of maybe run support, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that he's on a shitty baseball team. But you go even like a shred deeper than that. And yeah, there are plenty of pathways, but that's like from a betting standpoint on the every game betting video we did last night on Odd Shop, it's like you can build a case, but then it's the Dodgers ultimately.
Right. Now we are talking about a Dodgers lineup that has Mookie, Trey Turner, Freddie Freeman all in the teens in terms of strikeout rate. Muncy cleaning up at a 25.1% strikeout rate. Then back to Gavin Lux, who's in the teens. And then Gallo, Taylor, Bellinger, Walters, who are 39.6, 36.2, 27.4, and not appearing in my model here, but some aggressively high strikeout rate in the back of that lineup. And not necessarily a ton of hit tool when we're talking about the Gallos and the Bellingers of the world right now. So potentially, that's why I think there's potential for some sneaky upside for Brady Singer. But like I said, I just wish he was 7,500, 7,600, shave a few hundred more off that price. And I think he's a more interesting tournament option, but 25.1% strikeouts, a 3.28 xFIP on the season. You can't argue with the talent. He's a good young pitcher.
That's amazing. That's amazing. That's a lot of money right there for Jorge. And we move on, just seeing continued reaction here of this. We appreciate all the super chats. Definitely not necessary, but if you'd like to share anything, even if it's just a winning 100K blowout, or if it's just a question that you have.
I mean, it's not necessary for somebody to top Jorge's contribution, but I think somebody out there probably can. I mean, if we want to really challenge the chat.
Yeah. I mean, look, at that point, if we hit a K worth of super chats, I think at some point you, myself, Mike, we need to talk to management about getting some sort of return on this. Like, this now becomes a sale, right? As opposed to, it's one thing for the referral, and we'll tell everybody about what Jorge was able to use and why you should be out there as well, and give this MLB Live promo code out right now. But I mean, if we're getting over a K's worth of super chats, I don't know. I'll let you and your agent handle this all. Just don't forget me. That's all I'm saying. Okay.
Yeah, we're building in. This is like when the Writers Guild realized that DVDs and stuff like that were going to be residuals out in Hollywood, and had to go on strike for a year and ruin all of television for a year just to get their DVD money. Now we're realizing all these different streams of revenue. So yeah, probably should
how to get in now
behind the scenes.
All right, we'll get to the Mets-Phillies game in a second, but Jorge, thanks again for the info. Thanks again for the tips. You saw that on the super chat. How about the info? How about the tips? How do we get there? How do you take down 3 separate tournaments in one night and respond on the super chat? Just flick $400 like you're flicking your younger brother's ear on the super chat. Bang, here you go. Just take 400 like it's nothing there because you just cleaned up. Well, a lot of it starts here at Stokastic, and we want to give you an opportunity. That's why this stuff gets cut down to 50% off your first week on the Stokastic Plus Pass. So it's really simple, right? You can get access to all those Stokastic Plus tools, all the content. The Stokastic Plus Platinum Pass is what we do now for your first week. So if you're a new Stokastic Plus user, you can save 50% on any of the Stokastic Plus passes, and just use our promo code MLB Live. And honestly, I don't know what more I could say. There's probably a couple of things because you're more familiar with the ins and outs of everything that you could say. But I think Jorge's super chat, an explanation of what went down, might be the best representation, not sell, right? This isn't a sell. Jorge sold it. So if you think this is some sale job, blame his ass for the super chat. Of course, don't. Yeah. But I don't know anything more we could say than just go back and read Jorge's super chat. That's pretty much it. And you can save 50% off your first week.
That's it. I mean, we've been talking pretty much nonstop for the last like 5-6 minutes since he sent it, but that's technically like a mic drop super chat, man. I mean, that's just like proof's in the pudding, guys. He just went out, won 3 tournaments that night. Seems like well over 100K. So yeah, that's pretty killer. You don't really need to hard sell it too much from there, but ton going on at the site. And the other thing that you can do if you do hit something like that, or if you finish in the top 3 of a tournament with more than 5,000 people in it, is you tweet your win to at Stokastic HOF, and you can win yourself a free month of platinum. And Jorge, if you can do that for us, I think Mike jumped in the chat and asked you as well. But if you can tweet that win out to our Stokastic handle and our Stokastic HOF handle, we'll give you a little volume on congratulations on that one, and helps us out a little bit.
Absolutely. And look, here's the beauty of it. Next time you're on, you're going to see somebody say, yo, I won this, and we'll go back to today's show, and it'll just be the build.
That's it.
All right, let's go to the Mets-Phillies game here and look at this matchup. It's going to be consistent, I think. Maybe not to the extent that we've seen, but this is another strong pitching matchup here. Wheels on the road. Chris Bassitt, who has pitched well here, and that's probably going to be the best place to start. I know the Phillies starting to see the impact of not having a bat like Schwarber at the top of the lineup as well. So if you just want to look at this game, very low run projection right there at 7. And I'm surprised, actually, even with Chris Bassitt as not being Max Scherzer, not being Jacob deGrom, he doesn't have to be, he's pitched well, but I'm surprised that we don't see another 6.5. And maybe that was obviously from market and all, but here we are with another, I would think, low scoring game, which should favor the pitchers.
Yeah, it seems that way. And again, it's just, one of those, it seems like one of those slates where there's some good spots for pitching, and we can decide whether or not we want to deal with these good pitchers who are going up against good teams. And both of these guys are dealing with that. It's kind of like the situation we had last night. Both pitchers came through in a big way. I was more on the Nola side last night because I was saying, look, if we're as tough as this matchup might be, it's still Aaron Nola, and he's going like 4% on FanDuel, in the teens on DK. And that's very similar to what we're seeing for Zach Wheeler here. Zach Wheeler is probably the better of these two pitchers. He's similarly priced. He's 500 more on FanDuel. He's 300 more on DK, but he's drawing 10% less ownership on DK. Yep. He's drawing a third the ownership on FanDuel, 5% versus 15% for Bassitt on the other side. He's the better of the two pitchers. Bassitt, you could say, has the better matchup going up against this version of the Phillies lineup. We just saw Jake deGrom tear them apart, but I mean, that's Jake deGrom. But again, Nola had an equal start on the other side. Zach Wheeler, maybe he's not Aaron Nola, but he's damn close to Aaron Nola, and the numbers back that up. 27.2% strikeout rate, a 3.12 xFIP this season, 2.63 ERA, 2.18% home run rate. Those are all very much in line with what Nola's numbers are. I like a nice spot, Wheeler to have a nice start for us here, and I'll take the Phillies pitcher again at low ownership. I'll have some Bassitt. I might go a little bit below the field. He projects out, decently well for me, but it's more middle of the road for me. And I think that's kind of justified as well by the numbers. 24.2% strikeout rate this year, a 3.47 xFIP, 3.39 ERA. Very, very good pitcher. Those are excellent numbers. Nobody's saying he's not, and he typically does give you depth of start, but I do think there's enough threats still in this Phillies lineup. It's not like everybody's absent from
no, not at all.
So I think there's still there's good reason to go to Bassitt, but I think there's reason to consider the undercut at the price and the ownership.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point too, which is the Phillies aren't dead by any means, but to have, even if it's right there at the top, knowing that the on-base percentage or just average, what have you, could be lower, just to have the threat of power at the top to get to Scherzer, to get to deGrom, to get to Bassitt in this case in the first inning, you don't have that as much, right? So that's my point. But and I'm glad you clarified that, because you added a lot of volume to that point, which is this team can still hit. And it's probably an overreaction to think that Jacob deGrom is going to silence them like Chris Bassitt can. Interesting question there, though, from the chat. and I wanted to make sure that I got the right name there. I'll get you the name when I find it. But would you play Bass? Oh, there it is, King of Smack. Would you play Bassitt and Wheeler, together?
I don't love doing that on a slate of this size. I don't really love that idea. There's the notion that you're, potentially throwing the blanket over the win and you're chasing that similar ball game to last night, right? If you did that with both Nola and DeGrom, you spent a lot of salary last night, but you probably had a decent score from your pitching. It's tough to nail that. And these teams are both good enough that I don't love that idea. If they come out and just put up a few runs against either starter, chase them early enough, it's not going to get there for you. So it's not what I like doing, especially on a slate of this size where I do think there are good pitchers to spread around to.
All right. Now, what about from? Oh, I'm sorry, Terry.
No. I was adding unnecessary words saying that I was trying to keep
lowering your volume.
Right. But but again, there's no reason to say to keep this to a short answer when you're trying to keep something to a short answer. Now that we've added another 30 seconds to that.
Absolutely. But you and I, we like to explain the unnecessary. There's a Seinfeldian back and forth here with that. Absolutely. The stack standpoint this is where the conversation, I think, does open up. And maybe we can play off of recency bias where people just saw two ridiculously low games between these two teams. You have Wheeler, and again, to a lesser extent, but not in the sense of he's a bad, but just Wheeler and Bassitt, what have you here. You are countering a lot of the field, especially on DK, if this turns into a 6-4 baseball game, is my point.
Yeah, and I think they're all very low owned. So you only have to grab a couple of shares to be above the field, and you can put them together in some interesting combinations. You can go directly to some of the stars on both sides and just not sweat ownership. But again, you got to know that you're doing it against two of the top pitchers on the board, two of the better pitchers in the entire, not in the league, but certainly in the NL East, let's say. And they're sitting 1-2 in terms of probability of being the top pitcher on the FanDuel slate. They're sitting 2-4 on the DK slate in terms of probability of being in the top two. So, there's definitely some argument to be made for attacking that ownership, but I like doing that when we're talking about a more middle of the road pitcher who's getting a lot of popularity because he's cheap against a mediocre kind of a team, rather than taking shots at Zach Wheeler, at Chris Bassitt. Both of these guys also very good at limiting hard hit. 34.3% for Wheeler, 31.6% for Bassitt, 2.82% home run rate for Bassitt, 2.18% for Wheeler, suppressing the power numbers on both sides. So I like this game to finish more in that, 3-2, 4-3 kind of a range. I don't see either pitcher getting blown up. But I do think that, despite where they rank on our board, the negative leverage situation for the price on Chris Bassitt concerns me, where the positive leverage situation on Zach Wheeler intrigues me.
Real quick, before we hit another fantastic super chat from Sam, which we're going to have to go through a bunch of stuff all over again. And that's just the nature of what we do here when stuff pans out. But is there, and I asked this prefacing it. Well, I'm sorry. Yeah. You see that, right? We're going to get to Sam in 20 seconds. I just want to close the book on this game real quick so we don't have to come right back to it. Sure. But and I have to ask, of course, from a betting standpoint, because we do have a slate today that does not boast a bunch of high K rate guys. There are a couple, right? You've got Javier. We'll talk about him. In this matchup, I don't know if it's similar to what we talked about in the Braves game, where that lineup against lefties may negate some stuff from Braxton Garrett, at least to the point where it's worthy of a conversation here. Is there a K prop available? And I don't even have to give you the number specifically, but just looking at opportunities for both Zach Wheeler and Chris Bassitt, with the expectation that this game does stay low, does stay in that 6 to maybe 5 to even 4 run total range. Can you get there with a 27 and 24% K rate with Wheeler Bassitt, respectively?
I
was trying to talk through that and bring it up and filibuster.
I was hoping you would get there
enough. And I was hoping that you would answer with enough time to let me finish filibustering, but you went right to it, brother. Well, what is the number?
When I was checking, I was trying to also stall for time there and pull up my projections. I've got Zach Wheeler projected just under 6.5. So if it's a 6,
so I'll tell you right now.
There.
Well, Wheeler's at 5. And it's shaded to the under. It's actually
all right. So I've got him going over.
I'm in that right away. Okay.
Yeah,
and
that's
Bassitt?
interesting. And then Bassitt, I've got slightly over 5.5.
Wow. All right. So 5.5 is minus 136. Under 5.5 is plus 108.
I'd stay away too.
Stay away. But here you go.
The other side of
Terry's model, which worked pretty well Friday night, if we have to remind everybody here. You've got Wheeler projected for over 5.5 in the books for the most part. You could use Odd Shopper, I'm sure that's the best place to start and end. But if you're getting anything that's shaded to the under and the hold makes sense, I mean, that's pretty strong alongside your model. That's why I asked. Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. And again, the Mets, not a premium strikeout target necessarily. No, but he's a good strikeout pitcher. 27% strikeout rate on the season. I feel like that's just low. Given what he can do, and especially given that he's got the potential to pitch fairly deep into this game if he's going all right. Even it doesn't have to be an amazing start for him to go 6 and change, 7 innings and just find those strikeouts. So I like that spot. That's interesting.
Yeah, Wheels could give up 3 in the first and get 7 innings in a start.
Exactly. Yeah. And just find a strikeout in the second, 2 in the fourth, and that kind of a thing where it's just not a big game, but he gets there for you. I like that.
All right, we need to take a second or 5, if you will, and thank Sam. Specifically, thank Sam Schaefer here. Took down the $7 tournament on FanDuel last night for $25K. Using Stokastic tools. Again, this super chat from a dollar cent standpoint is definitely not necessary. So I didn't want to, Sam, I didn't forget you. I didn't want to rush it. I didn't want to squeeze this in between Terry's last point about a stack and then me. All right, well, let's go back to a bet. We wanted, like we did with Jorge, we want to highlight this because you're out there winning. And that's part of this community. You're part of the Odd Shot or the Stokastic. I'm doing too many VODs on Odd Shopper. You're part of this huge Stokastic community. You're winning. And we want to know that. We want to celebrate with you. We want to recognize that. We don't want to jam that in between 2 small points of this stupid Phillies Mets game that's probably going to have 1 run in it. Thank you, Sam, for letting us know that. Congratulations, my friend, for taking that down and for reminding the world that you did it here with what we're providing, because that means a lot for us.
Absolutely love it. And definitely tweet it at the handles I mentioned before, the Stokastic one, the Stokastic HOF one, so you get your recognition in that forum too, man. That's a killer win. And remember what I said at the top of the show. I was saying, hey, I didn't have a great night last night, but hopefully somebody out there did use the tools, the content and everything to win. And that's our guy, because that's the tournament I played my lineups in. So congrats, Sam. That's awesome.
That is amazing. Amazing. And again, not to just whoop, slide or gloss over anything. But even if Mike wanted to put that up there on the screen, as we can we can talk behind the MLB Live graphic to remind everybody about the 50% off and just continue to virtually pat both Sam and Jorge on the back, right? Like we can do both. This isn't like, hey, there's a cause. Oh, let's sell a bunch of T-shirts and make money off it, right? Like we're balancing that.
They just, they're typically talking or like juggling or something like that on your screen, and the numbers just crawling across the bottom. So just put a little crawl there with the MVP promo info or whatever it is, and MLB Live, right? Is the promo?
Yes.
MLB Live, just
First
scrolling
week,
across the bottom of the
off.
screen, plus the way to donate super chats and send your donations. Not that they're going to a good cause necessarily.
Well, look, that means that they're not going
into
to
the
your
weed fund, and it goes into the beer fund and whatever else. I guess some of you guys with kids might buy other things, but I don't know about those things.
No, trust me, it definitely stops. I just banked the 30K with kids. Now I'll let you know when that happens. All right. Because I have the kid. I just need to hit the 30K. I'll let you know when that happens. But I can imagine in smaller increments of, hey, I just hit a $2,500 3-leg parlay. It's like, okay, well, we need this, the water heaters, the home ownership and child, Terry, have changed all of my excitement, or at least curbed a lot of my excitement winning stuff, because I know that I can't share it with my best friend, my partner, my wife, the most important person outside of my son in my life, because it's going to be.
I was just kind of picturing you like you're home and Rhys Hoskins hits his home run and you hit your prop and you just, instead of celebrating, you just open the wallet and hand a few $100 to the wife. Like that's not how that works at home. I thought that was the case.
It's virtually. I do it on an app.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
All right.
Gotcha.
All right. That's all. Christian Javier came up earlier. Oh no, sorry. I jumped over that. We've got the O's and Rays game. And this is where the ownership versus value conversation, I definitely think meets or comes to a head, if you will, here, because the overall numbers, and again, we're just looking at this on the MLB video for today, for Jordan Lyles, different than what you've seen right over the last stretch with him out there on the mound. 8,800 is something to look at here, especially that's FanDuel, sorry, 8,800 overall for Lyles. On DK, 6,600. So that's a significant difference. And you are getting positive leverage last I checked with Lyles. So you have that opportunity. And on the flip side, Drew Rasmussen, who is popping a little bit, 7,300, but both are really getting a decent positive leverage score here if you like going cheaper routes.
Yeah, and it's one of those spots with Jordan Lyles in particular. I prefer the Rasmussen side, but to address the Lyles situation, you remember the scene in Endgame, in the beginning of Endgame, when Iron Man's all pissed off at Captain America, and he tells him, like, I have no trust, no faith, no nothing. That's kind of how I feel about Jordan Lyles. But he still went into the fight with him alongside Captain America, and ended up winning the day. I don't know that Jordan Lyles is going to win you the day, but I think at 6,600, you can get away with some shots. He's drawing 7% ownership. I wish it was one of those situations where it's like, hey, this guy's super cheap and 1% of the field is playing it. It's a pitcher's park. The Rays are a middle of the road kind of a lineup. I think there's maybe enough there, but I just have no faith that it's going to come through. And some of the other options just look so much better. The Rays 24.3% strikeout rate, ranks 25th in baseball against righties.
Yep.
We're talking about a guy with a fairly long track record of being a 18 to 19% strikeout rate pitcher, a 4.57 xFIP this year, a 4.73 last year. And that's over 180 innings and 30 starts last year, 130 and a third and 23 starts so far this year. So there's a track record here in, the recent sample. Tough call. I don't know that I'd be much beyond the field on him. And that's the kind of play that I like to be like, either well ahead of the field or just not have it. Tough call. I don't want to say go land on the field's number there. If you're feeling aggressive and you want to push out to like 15% on DK, there's enough reason. I just gave you the reasons. That's the best I can say about it. Rasmussen's more interesting on the other side, going up against the O's to me. I have a little bit more trust. Similar strikeout rate, 20% versus the 18.3, but a 3.73 xFIP is a lot better. A 2.96 ERA is very nice. Generates a 10.9% swinging strike rate. Orioles top end is certainly interesting. That's a good young top end of a lineup. 22.6% strikeout rate overall for them, though, ranks 21st in baseball, 101 WRC plus. So it's a very similar team on both sides in terms of the offense. I just have a little bit more faith in the Rasmussen spot. 7,800 also on FanDuel helps a little bit versus Jordan Lyles, who's 8,800. They're differently priced on DK, where Rasmussen's 73.
Yeah, that opens up Tampa, and you're going to get a pretty good opportunity here in the sense of that they're not negatively leveraged. You're not dealing in this stack. To be fair, we talked about Chicago. We have a little bit with the other Chicago team and the White Sox in Houston, but it's really the Cubs who stand out as like the heavy negatively leveraged team. And looking at that, though, from the standpoint solely, of Tampa Bay, it looks like there's some pretty good opportunity there. I don't know about Baltimore. I know they were hot. And then all of his last two games, it looks like against some better pitching, things have kind of settled. So I don't know if, especially Rasmussen, what you laid out, if that's an opportunity to get to much Baltimore today. Maybe it is more of a chance in this game specifically, if it's one of the two, to get to more Tampa.
Yeah, Tampa is the side I prefer. I think in that one, they're showing through for some power here against Jordan Lyles. He's got a 3.14% home run rate, only a 38.7% hard hit, but a 10.5% barrel that I think is targetable. Last year's hard hit was 41.6, 9.1% barrel, and a 4.94% home run rate. He's a guy who reliably gives up some power. No Brandon Lau in this lineup, though, which hurts the upside in terms of, it hurts the upside across the board, but certainly their power upside. I am still seeing some power for G-Man Choi, Randy Rosarena, Luke Raley down toward the bottom of the lineup, maybe a little sneaky. Jose Siri down toward the bottom of the lineup, maybe a little sneaky. Both those guys, dead minimum 2,000 on DK, 2,200, 2,100 on FanDuel. So they're easy to put together in terms of a lot of value pricing and some potential pop up and down the lineup. Neither one of those players, Luke Raley, Jose Siri, have been at all good so far this year in their limited samples, but both of those guys are showing through a little bit, and they do have, reason to believe in them. from a pedigree standpoint. So you can get there. They're all owned under 10%. They're easy enough to roster, and Jordan Lyles, targetable pitcher here. So I will have some Rays, but I'm disappointed no Brandon Lau. I had to take him out of my placeholder.
All right, let's move on to Houston. And Javier came up a couple of times. You have that K rate. Should be an opportunity here, you would think, especially with Cole Irvin maybe on the other side. And it has been limited, but there are a couple of guys on Houston who have been able to hit Irvin. So maybe that factors in here. The low run projection, it doesn't look like this is a good matchup either at the plate or on the mound for the Oakland A's, unless we're countering maybe the field here.
No, and I mean, with this lineup, you could be on the mound and it wouldn't necessarily be a good matchup for the Oakland A's. So, yeah, like I said at the top of the show when somebody asked about it, I really like the spot for Javier on both sites. 10-6 to 8,700 FanDuel to DK. He's a very different play price-wise, but he's drawing similar ownership on both sites because it's a spectacular matchup, because he's projecting very well on everybody's sites. I think it makes a ton of sense to at least get around the field on him. I'll comfortably be around that 21% number on FanDuel, and I tend not to push much beyond that. I might let him into some more lineups. I might push that out to around 30%. We'll see how it falls in the sort in a minute. Cole Irvin, very, very targetable for me with these Astros bats. They're all, except for Jeremy Pena on FanDuel, under 10%. Pena just scratching over 10%. They're all low enough owned on DK. I don't really understand it. Cole Irvin, not a very good pitcher, 17.2% strikeout rate over 123 and a third. You could argue that he's not giving up a ton of home runs, but I would counter with a 40.7% hard hit and a 9% barrel. And I would say that this hard hitting Astros team that puts bat on ball, drives it like crazy, and is under owned has a good opportunity to change his home run situation. So I think we can definitely target Astros bats here.
Awesome, man. And it just, again, we want to, well, real quick, as far as that 41+% for Javier, are you going to cap that at, maybe mid 30s, something along those lines, or do you push that number?
8,700 on DK, you can almost say to just let it fly today. 37.5% ownership. If I was playing on DK, I wouldn't mind being over that, to be quite honest. And again, that's not a position that I usually take. I think he's talented enough that you can kind of push the envelope with him. He ranks out as our top pitcher to be a top 2 starter on the DK slate. He's negatively leveraged. I mean, what you're tangling with, and his ownership's actually gone up. It's 41.6 now. So, maybe you shoot for being around the field, but I wouldn't want to undercut him too much. I believe in the spot especially at that price, just way too much. And then, like I said, I might even push a few additional chips in on him, even at 10-6 on the FanDuel slate, even with 21% ownership. It's just a really, really good spot for a pitcher with a 32.5% strikeout rate. He's, I think, the best or second best strikeout rate on the slate. So going up against a just anemic offense.
Yeah, real quick on Houston's stack, it's everything you laid out with Cole Irvin, and still, like, I get it, they've got a -3 last I checked leverage score, but I'm actually surprised this isn't closer to where the Chicago Cubs are. And we see this a lot, right? Where just because they're -3 or -3.1 here to be exact, doesn't mean that you apply, they're negative leverage and it's the same thing. Like, it's almost like you're getting nearly 3.5 points of expected leverage if you have, and I don't know what your projected number would be, but it's almost like based on their ability to make up with Cole Irvin, more people should be getting to them. And that actually helps you, even though they're negatively leveraged at 3.1. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And, there's spots where we talk about, all right, you take more weight and negative leverage at pitching because it's more reliable, but I'm willing to take negative leverage, particularly with lineups like the Astros, where they just play from, 1 through 9 most days. And today looks like one of those days where I can get to basically everybody in this lineup today without much issue. And they're not like maybe they're negatively leveraged, but the raw ownership on these guys, and especially some of the key hitters in this lineup, is not such that you'd want to run away on the DK slate where it's higher, and certainly not on FanDuel where everybody's below 10% except for Jeremy Pena. So from top to bottom, Jose Altuve, Jeremy Pena, Jordan Alvarez, Alex Bregman, Kyle Tucker. I mentioned Alvarez Alvarez and Tucker yesterday, lefty, and I'll reiterate, they go under owned when they're lefty, and neither of those hitters is overly impacted by lefty, particularly against a guy like Cole Irvin. There's no reason not to roster both of those guys. Alvarez, one of the higher ranked home run hitters in my model. Kyle Tucker just below the 10 magic number, but right there with him. And then you've still got, we can go on with this lineup. You've still got now Trey Mancini in the 6th spot in this lineup. Chas McCormick, I mentioned on the show yesterday, one of my favorite guys to go to when he's sneaky, and today he's sneaky. 2,600, 5% owned on DK, 2,400, 1.5% on FanDuel. He's got an 11.4% barrel rate and a 41.5% hard hit, 11 home runs and 280 plate appearances. Good hard hit, drive the ball kind of hitter who can change a lineup at no ownership. Even Christian Vasquez is interesting. Jake Myers is interesting. 1 through 9 in this lineup. You can fire away.
Let's move to the White Sox Tigers game here. Lance Lynn, we talked about earlier, the Lyles streak. I mean, he's definitely been on a nice little heater of his own, especially as bad as things were kind of heading into the All-Star break. Tyler Alexander in Detroit on the other side. So this is probably like a poor man's version of what we just ran through with Oakland, where if you're not excited about Oakland and you're not excited about Cole Irvin, I don't know how much more you could be with Detroit and Tyler Alexander, especially where we can begin in this conversation with Lance Lynn and the ridiculous amount of ownership and negative leverage that's being associated with him, especially on DK. 6,800, you can understand why with the matchup.
Yeah, that's a broken price. This Tigers team is just historically bad against right-handed pitching specifically. They're bad against everybody, but specifically against righties. And the rumors of Lance Lynn's demise are much exaggerated. When he came back from the IL, everybody was saying, oh, well, it's not there anymore. And all of a sudden now over 11 starts, 59 2/3, he's sitting at a 23.8% strikeout rate, a 4.2% walk, 3.56 xFIP, inducing an 11.8% swinging strike. He's given up a little bit too much hard hit, 42.9% and a 4.98% home run rate, but there's some happenstance baked into that. He's correctly priced at 9,000 on FanDuel for this matchup. I'll play some of them, but I'll probably be below the field on FanDuel. I do think that DK spot, though, is worth going to. 6,800, it's just way too low. And if you're grabbing, even at popularity, if you're grabbing him at 6,800 against the Tigers and Christian Javier for 8,700 against the Athletics, you're drawing two very good pitchers against two of the worst teams in baseball for very discounted prices. Yeah, you're going alongside with most of the field, but there's a bunch of stacks to choose from, and you can pay for a bunch of different hitting combinations. So I think there are ways to get different, even with the chalkiest, most negatively leveraged pitching combination, which would be exactly that combination. So it's just an interesting way those two guys come together today because of those two completely broken prices.
Yeah, jumping out at that. Absolutely. And look, the field is highly aware of it, right? As we see the ownership numbers, and rightfully so, that makes sense. And again, much like with Oakland, and to an even greater extent, as you just laid out with Detroit, I mean, they don't score on the road in the first inning. They don't score in the first 5 on the road. Like this, there's just so many things working against them that I don't even know if it's worth any risk to try and counter, like we talked about trying to counter Javier. The same thing with Lynn here. So is this just an auto fade for Detroit and Alexander?
Yeah. Detroit's on that list. I pretty rarely get to them.
Right.
And Lynn, I don't necessarily think is worth targeting here. With the weight of ownership on DK, you could argue that a few Tigers stacks are okay here. And it would be around like Riley Green, Victor Reyes, Javi Baez, maybe as a 3-man. I don't love very much more than that. Heimer Candelario, 10 home runs, 202, 265, 346, 26% below average creating runs. And he's one of the better options later in the lineup. So I just don't like it. I don't like doing that with bad teams, but against the 36% ownership with some of the home run happenstance and hard hit that Lynn's given up, maybe you grab 4 or 5 Tiger shares in 150 lineups. But if you're building 3, if you're building 20, I wouldn't have it.
Now, we talked about Brady Singer earlier in the show, Terry, and there was a bunch of positive things, and any light we can shine on the pitcher, was just hovered and ultimately extinguished, if you will, because it's the Dodgers. So, yes, Brady Singer is better than what we got with Tyler Alexander and even the metrics you see with Cole Irvin, but I feel like this is going to be different means to the same end of the last now 3 games that we talk about, which is one side's real. And look, Anderson doesn't have that strikeout rate, so maybe there is a little bit more hesitation to get to him as there would be Christian Javier. But you've got Anderson on one side, and it's the Dodgers versus a Royals team that's not projected to do much at all against Tyler Anderson, and Brady Singer, who's good, but he's going up against the Dodgers. So is this a similar scenario with Detroit and Oakland where we could kind of just brush off Kansas City as a whole?
In terms of stacking them?
Or both. That's what I mean. Like we kind of brushed over.
I think I'm more interested in the Kansas City bats at very low ownership, affordable pricing on both sites with some interesting multi-position in there, and just very low prices, particularly down toward the bottom of the lineup. I think I'm a little bit more interested in them than I am in Tyler Anderson. For 78 on DK and no ownership, you can take some shots with Tyler Anderson. There's no reason not to. Good, capable pitcher. Only a 20.1% strikeout rate, but there's plenty of strikeouts in that Royals lineup now. So I think he could find a good start. But there are other options that I think I prefer, and I'm seeing a little bit of pop here for the Royals, oddly. And it's a little bit inexplicable because Anderson is not giving up a ton of barrels or hard hit, not giving up a lot of home runs. He does give up a 16.7 degree average launch angle, so maybe it's pulling a little bit of that, a little bit of just the baked in power that you get around an MJ Melendez, a Bobby Witt, a Sal Perez, Hunter Dozier. There's some reason to have a little bit of belief in the Royals. It won't be a spot I go to a lot. And the top three hitters in that lineup on DK are arguably over-owned, just over 10%. But the Vinny Pasquantino, the Brent Rooker part of that lineup is somewhat interesting. Hunter Dozier, all low-owned, very cheap. So maybe a few Royal stacks around the edges, and maybe I avoid the Tyler Anderson. I'm not going to Tyler Anderson for 95 on FanDuel. I just don't want it.
What is kind of interesting here to add to your point about the Royals and getting to them is that based on Alex's projection and where we have them as far as their ownership projection, at least on DK, you're getting a negative leverage score with this squad. So I don't know if
on the stack.
Last I checked on DK,
probably largely driven by that ownership on the top three hitters who were all like 10-12% owned. But that's interesting. That would probably
minus
make me even
2.4. Let me run it again real quick on a refresh, Terry. I didn't mean to jump in there, but I had it at minus 2.4 on DK, which is surprising. But to your point, you're like they're getting a little bit of pop. They're right. So maybe a couple of other people have seen that, or maybe there's just a pathway, as you mentioned with Anderson.
Well, I think part of it is just that they're not very highly ranked in the site's
absolutely
as being a probability of the top two. It's easy to go negatively leveraged when you've only got a 2.6% probability of being the top stack. So that's against only a 5.8% ownership share. So that's low enough. And everybody outside of those top three hitters is super low owned and around the minimum price. So they're very easy to build with. So that's why they get a little bit of attention here. But again, this is one where they're showing a little bit of pop in my model. I might get to them a little bit more than the site indicates by the Stokastic tools. Bottom three team. They're just ahead of the Marlins and the Athletics, just behind the Orioles in terms of probability of success on that DK slate. And like you said, negatively leveraged. So definitely reasons to not go to it. Tyler Anderson, like I said, doesn't allow a lot of power. So just depends on, I guess, who you want to believe in.
Yeah, that makes sense. A lot of times it does come down to that, right?
Please.
Anything you want to clean up in this game before we move to St. Louis?
Dodgers always very stackable. That said, a lot of ownership in the top five on DK, decent amount of ownership on FanDuel, but it drops off the board immediately around the Gavin Lux, Joey Gallo, Chris Taylor, Cody Bellinger part of the lineup. So if you want to target those guys, and I said it yesterday, I would roster some of those guys on their own as a three-man stack. So if I'm taking some shares of those guys, mixing and matching with the Freddies, the Mookies of the world, that can help lower your overall ownership and lower the probability of being duped in your combinations. So you can definitely go there. Singer, interesting for tournaments, but I wish it was a smaller slate, or maybe he was a little cheaper.
So a couple of games left here, including that Rockies on the FanDuel slate. We'll get to that at Coors. St. Louis hosting Milwaukee. By the way, shout out to Crash Boards DFS, our pal Cooper on the Odd Shopper channel, just crushing these WNBA plays. So if you want to plug now to go over to the Odd Shopper channel, don't worry about all the shit that I'm putting out. There's going to be like 50 nonsensical long shot parlays and no run first inning stuff. Follow Cooper. He knows what he's doing, and he's going to hit you on Prize Picks for some WNBA plays as well. And if you're following me on Twitter at Shander Show, you've seen a couple of screen grabs that I've put. You think I know what I'm doing betting the Phoenix Mercury? You think I have any idea what I'm doing? No, I'm just watching a video, following along, and just plug and that seems to be the theme here on a couple of these sites, Terry. Plug and play, right? Like people are doing the homework for people out there. And who am I to be above having my homework done for me by somebody smarter than me?
Yeah, and I mean, that's what's great about the site, right? It caters to people who don't want to do their homework, but it also caters to the people who do put that effort in. So it's not like you're going to the site and you're being aggressively sold a bet. It's not like one of these sites where it's just like, really trying to push the servers, really trying to push. For one, it's free. So, it's not like there's a lot of subscription dollars to be asked for there, but it just plays both ways, where if you've got a bet that you love based on something you saw, something you heard, whatever the case may be, you can go to Odd Shopper and just look for the best place to place that bet that you already want to make. On the other side of it, if you have no idea what you're betting on, you can go there and check it out and find out a good bet to make anywhere. Yep. And the same is true with all of our different tools, all of our prop tools. They help you in both directions. Helps affirm something that you already believe and help you find something you don't know. So,
by the way, this is why we didn't have in like 9 minutes or so before lock. This is why we didn't have any time to talk about any movies or TV or all the other bullshit that you and I said. Right. We've had super chats. We've had our betting analysts pop in. I just want everybody out there at the Stokastic management tree to recognize that two of the easiest people to derail a show have stayed on point and have chosen instead to prop up winners as opposed to give you a Mount Rushmore and the best finales of a sitcom.
Isn't there a drop that somebody used to have where they say they're a company man? I think from one of the old ESPN podcasts for fantasy baseball. I think one of the guys who's prominently not a company man over there anymore, actually, as of
has that. Yeah, maybe there's the irony.
Yeah, that was him. Right?
All right, let's hit the Cardinals Brewers game and see what you can do with Aaron Ashby. We talked about how there aren't a ton of guys with higher K rates. We know Ashby has that. It's just a matter of can he take advantage of it with this Cardinals lineup. Michaelis on the other side, or Mikolas, I don't know. I don't know if there's anything really available here for you. Although that whip's low, I don't know if the K rate is enough for you, but the Brewers are just not projected to do much. So that's the interesting rub with that matchup versus Ashby and the Cardinals bats.
Yeah, Michaelis, not a guy that I typically target, but for 7,100 on DK, 4% owned, you can take some shots, I think, against this Brewers team with a righty. I think there's just enough there that he's a better real life pitcher. He's one of those guys that can get you through 6 clean innings and put up 4 or 5 strikeouts, have a decent game against this team. I think he could do that. It's not like there's a lot of ownership or a lot of cost involved there. At 8,700 on FanDuel, I don't really want to go there. He's only 2% owned. If I have a few shares around the edges, it's fine. He projects out in the middle of my board. Ashby on the other side is an interesting case. He's got a 26.9% strikeout rate, but he's got a 10.7% walk rate. He's got a 3.40 xFIP, but a 1.46 whip. He puts too many guys on base, but he's capable of getting himself out of trouble. He's avoided hard hit, 33.6%, 6.4% barrel, avoided home runs, 2.87%. But he is going up against a team that the Cardinals against left-handed pitching has been the reliably best spot for offense in baseball all season long. They have a 141 WRC plus against lefties. That's like 10, 15 percentage points higher than any other spot in any split in the league for run creation. They have a 16.8% strikeout rate. That's second best in baseball against lefties, a 198 ISO. This team tattoos lefties pretty routinely. So I'm kind of worried about Ashby, but that's also impacting his ownership. 8,500 on FanDuel, 0.5% owned, 75 on DK, 0.9% owned. I think this is a firm scumbacker spot where you can grab a few shares of Aaron Ashby, hope that he finds that upside, hope that he finds some of his strikeouts and keeps this Cards lineup down while also rostering a handful of card stacks and taking those insurance shots against him. It's just kind of an interesting tournament play, but I do not expect him to come through here.
Before we move on, I know we're getting there, so we'll jam in without just racing through these final 2 games. But is there anything? What jumps out at you more? The pitcher for St. Louis or the low run projection from Milwaukee? And is it more just a stay away if it's both?
Yeah, it's just that kind of a spot where, like I said, I think it's just Mikolas is a better real life pitcher where he's just more likely to keep this lineup down than find a dozen strikeouts for us.
That's fair. That's fair. Now, Gilbert and Martin
side, I definitely want to go to, though.
Okay.
Yeah. Grab some of those righty power bats. It's fairly easy.
Yes. And then that's why, again, just because it may not be one metric that explains everything, and somebody may see that and say, oh, well, and then you explain, well, there's actually a couple of things working against that. Seattle and Texas, we can look at the pitching matchup. This may be another example of real life versus DFS with both of these guys.
Yep. And I was just actually trying to figure out why they're not coming up because I wasn't getting much cards. So that's interesting. I'm gonna have to force them in here. Both of these guys in this one's somewhat interesting. Martin Perez, low owned, under 10% for under 8,000 on DK, and 3.5% for a much higher price on the FanDuel slate. Like him better on DK where he's a discount and under 10%. Mariners are a frisky team, but he's been capable this year. 21.1% strikeout rate, a 3.70 xFIP. We've taken weirder shots than this throughout the course of the season. So not one of my favorite spots on the board, but he projects out okay. I think it's better on DK where he's cheap. Logan Gilbert, very nice season for him. 22.1% strikeout rate, a 3.94 xFIP. Giving up a little bit in the hard hit department. 47.3% hard hit might lead me into a few insurance stacks with the Rangers, but I think he's worthwhile as well. In a similar situation price wise, 7,700 is very cheap. He's drawing some ownership on DK. 9,600, a little bit expensive, not owned at all on FanDuel. I think he's consequently more interesting on FanDuel than he is on DK, where he's getting a little bit low ownership on the FanDuel slate going up against the Rangers, where I just think that's a better strikeout matchup than the one that Perez is facing. So maybe you get a little bit better of a shot at an upside game from the Gilbert side of it.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a pretty significant, now granted, it's not Lance Lynn, it's nowhere near Christian Javier by any means, but you've got a negative leverage score for Logan Gilbert working against him in some capacity. And a large part of that is the 17% projected ownership. I think outside of Bassitt, I think he's even catching more than Wheels, right? Yeah. So outside of Bassitt, he's now the fourth highest projected pitcher, to your point there about, the K's being there. But I don't know if at 7,700, how much it's worth pushing that number, that ownership there, and capping it even at 15, 16%. It's still a risk. And I don't know how much you're gaining by saving money. I'm not saying it's a bad play. I'm not saying fade him by any means.
On which guy?
Gilbert.
On Gilbert. Yeah, 17% is probably around where he should be. I'd probably shoot to be a little lower than that. I'd probably go in like the 12 range, just because that's the point where, if we're talking about that $7,700 price tier, that's the point where we're spreading some shares around to the Drew Rasmussens of the world, Mikolas on the other side, Ashby if you want to go there, Lance Lynn for cheaper, Jordan Lyles if you're crazy. So that's one of those spots where it's just, I'd probably just by virtue of math have a little bit less than the field there.
Yep. Okay. Last game, FanDuel slate. Let's hit it. Coors Field. Look at that monster total, 12.5. And let's just look at this as a big picture conversation here, knowing, of course, that you've got Tommy Henry and Ryan Feltner, AAA wonders, guys that have been called up and down. I mean, how do you not smash away here, specifically because of the pitching matchup?
Yeah, I think, in the past couple of days, it's been a spot where I've been saying, hey, bad baseball teams, not a spot I love to go to just because it's a good ballpark. Today, particularly, actually kind of on both sides, but particularly on the Arizona side, they're showing so much power in my model. The top of the board with a bullet, most of the lineup over the magic number of 10 in my home run model is leading me into a more Arizona than I was getting to. Fortunately, they're a little bit lower on. They're in the 20s as opposed to like the high 20s or 30s. So I think there's some interesting spots. Some Alec Thomas for only 9.6% ownership is interesting, 3,300. Don't love the bottom of the lineup, but there are some spots I'm getting to some of that. The Rockies are higher on than they were yesterday. I like them better in the 1% and 2% ownership range, but I think they're worth getting to as well here against Tommy Henry. Some of the big righty power bats like CJ Cron, Randall Grichuk. You could certainly grab some Brendan Rodgers, even Ryan McMahon, lefty. I don't mind that spot. Don't expect Tommy Henry to be in here long. And he's actually kind of low owned, 3,400 and below 10%. I kind of like that for Ryan McMahon. So I'll have more of both these teams than I've had any of the last couple days.
And that you won't have a shred of either of these pitchers. And if they were on DK, you wouldn't have a shred on either of these pitchers. Right?
No, certainly not. Yeah, even if they were on DK where we need to. Yeah, I mentioned Gallen last night and he went out and had a very nice game, but I do not expect that from these guys. So,
you could squeeze a couple of home runs in, Terry, real quick.
1 second. I also have to squeeze some lineups in.
Well, yeah, you also have to,
top of the board overall. I mentioned how the Diamondbacks were showing through for more power than they have, and Christian Walker is the top of the board with a bullet. That's kind of chalky there. Let's see, Brandon Lau was up there, but he's not playing. Franmil Reyes, there's my guy. 12.35 on the home run model out with the Cubbies. He's probably drawing a little bit of ownership because they're getting some popularity, but at least it's not Coors level ownership. So like Franmil to get one today.
Look, I think at some point this game, and probably sooner than later in Coors, is going to go to the pen, and there's going to be some stability there. It's going to be harder, I think, to get. So if I'm going to go and play anything in this game, I'd actually go over 6.5, depending on where you could find it first 5. Both of these guys are going to be victimized. It's pretty hard to think otherwise. So
yeah, I think that's worth targeting. Let me
awesome.
Let me get these lineups in here.
Yep, go ahead. You do what you have to do. We appreciate everybody hanging with us. We know it's Sunday, so thank you. By all means, hit the thumbs up button. Make sure you're subscribed. Go on. We told you about Odd Shopper as well. There's a ton of shit happening here on the Stokastic community, the season-long fantasy football, the best ball channels. Everything is here for you. It's up and running. Thanks to Mike Awesome, as always, for producing here. And look, go out and win some money. Go out and win some money. Go out and win $100,000 today. All right. That's on you out there.
Love it.
Because Terry's going to try and do it again. So you might as well do it.
As long as he's not playing a placeholder lineup, if these lineups upload in time. Yeah, we got it.
Let's hope.
We're good. We had a minute and change to spare.
There we go. We'll see.
Forgot it was a 37, not a 35, honestly, there. So the heart was beating a little bit quickly.
That's right, 37. I wanted to get out. It's kind of like, I don't have time for the analogy. It's 1:37.
Now I got nothing but time. We can hang out all day and talk if you want.
I got to go to the pool with my son. Come on, man.
Oh, that sounds a lot better than hanging out and talking to me. Yeah,
I know you're not there yet, but I got to be a dad. Trust me.
Have fun, buddy. That sounds like a good time.
We appreciate everybody hanging. Thanks, Terry. Always a pleasure, my brother.
Likewise.